Hello again, Steve here with a little bit of a pre-run of a speech I was asked to do tonight, and it has to do with a topic called Delegating to Empower. And this was a friend of mine is doing this symposium or whatever it is with local engineers, and they want to hear about different life skills sort of topics. And I'm no engineer or whatever, so at first I said, well, what do I have to share here? But she encouraged me to present this anyways, so I come up with something based loosely on some previous information, some research and whatnot. So it's not all my own stuff, of course. Some of my thoughts put into it, sort of thing. But it starts with a bit of a story, which has to do with a delegated situation where I was working for this ferry corporation. We ran ferries back and forth from the mainland to Vancouver Island years ago. And I was kind of a junior marine engineer, but there was, on the watch, there was the chief engineer. And this one particular guy, he was very much of an authoritarian. He was a little bit like Yertle the Turtle in Dr. Seuss, right? He liked to sit on top of everybody else and make sure that, basically shit flowed downhill. And he would get us all together before the watch. You're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to keep doing it. I'll come and see you when there's something else to do. This happened a couple of times. He wouldn't show up, so I'd just eventually, walk out and find him and say, hey, what's the next thing to do? But he kept doing this, and one time, I don't know, he didn't like something I did or whatever, so he stressed it. Now, make sure you stay on that job until I come and get you. And it was down in some little compartment way at the tiller flats of the ship, whatever it was. So I went down there, and it was, 15-minute job or whatever. I finished the job. He didn't show up. And it was a long shift. It was about an 8-hour shift. So I basically twiddled my thumbs and then went a few times, wandered to get a soft drink or something. I went back there and I never showed up in the control room again for the whole watch. Well, maybe about 3/4 of the way through, somebody came looking for me, wondering where I was. It was almost like they had to put out a search party or something, right? And he was all pissed off at me when I got back there, and he asked me, well, where were you? And I said, well, you told me to do the job and not to leave until you come and get me. And when I'm going to ask the question at this event, who here thinks that this guy was absolutely respected by anybody? No, he wasn't. It was a bit of a joke, and nobody had any respect for him. Top down kind of guy, right? And I would say that he personified a lot of things that we don't really want in a boss or leadership. I would say that he displayed this weakness in authority. He somehow how he felt that, like Yertle the Turtle, if anybody showed him up, he would show weakness. So he always wanted to have this top-down micromanagement style of leadership, which basically annoyed people, and nobody liked him. But they put up with him, basically. And what I saw there was a typical pyramid scheme of power structure, which is, in any authoritarian structure, that's what it is. It's basically, the king kahuna, the Yertle the Turtle sitting on top, and all the peons down below, right? And, one guy told me it was a plumber one time, he told me there's two things you got to remember in plumbing. Payday is Friday, and some real nasty stuff flows downhill. And that's kind of the way he operated, was not so much the payday Friday, because it had nothing to do with him, but all the shit from him and his mind or whatever flowed downhill, and he was the boss, not to be questioned. So the bottom line, I guess, most people that I've ever talked to, they don't really want to be delegated to, especially in that way. They don't want to be voluntold, right? People have enough, I guess, autonomy within themselves. They just kind of don't like that. And, because not only does it have that stinking, dirty little word called work attached to it, but there's all this, lack of control mixed in with it, right? And it's like, you kind of do it like, darn, not again. I got to go back down to that dirty, stinking, noisy machinery space and do whatever. But there's no respect for the man. There's no respect for the boss because of the behavior. So The result, I would say, is that there's lack of creativity, lack of productivity. And I can actually tell you in this situation when I was sent down there, I literally twiddled my thumbs for hours on end just thinking about stuff and wandering around. And because I had enough of it already, of being chased around by this guy. And that was the result. The result was he thought that he was being productive maybe, but he wasn't. He wasn't certainly getting any productivity out of me. And furthermore, if he was to get further productivity out of me, he'd have to heavily supervise me, right? So the challenge is, though, for us as people who want to aspire to leadership or whatever in our families or whatever, wherever it is, even running our own lives, right? There's aspects of ourselves that we have to delegate to times. Because here's the thing, we're busy, right? We only have so many hands and so much time. And I don't know about you, but I haven't figured out how to clone myself yet. If I could be thousands of miles away, but I got to get something done here, I have to delegate to somebody. At the same time, there's frustration sometimes of people not delivering, people not giving us the results that we would hope for. So there must be some sort of strategy in how to do this. Well, I would say that if, going back to that same story, right? For me, my experience with this guy as the boss, if he had been a respectable person, if he hadn't behaved the way he did, if he had, I would have done a great job. I didn't do a great job, but I would have done a great job. And I would have just gone back to him and, got the next job and run with that. I would have been motivated to help him because he was respectable. I would enjoy him. I would enjoy his personality, his conversation, I would have respect for him, kind of thing, right? And and the other thing too is that if he had used positive affirmations like noticing what people did right, there would have been more respect. Whereas what his style was top-down threats and veiled threats and sometimes outright threats. I'm going to write you up, and he'd say things like, you got to know your place. You should know that, sort of put downs on a regular basis. If he had been somebody who engaged in what it is that motivated me once in a while, asked me what it is that motivated me, he could then, incentivize the work environment or whatever in such a way to calibrate the fulfillment of that motivation and get even more work. But never any of that whatsoever. It was all just, I'm the boss and you got to do this because I said so, right? And if he had come down off his perch once in a while, like Yertle the Turtle didn't until it all crashed, and joined the team, and became more of like somebody who supported, made sure that there was the compatibility of work environment, that there was enough skills training, that there was resources and so on, then it would have been like, wow, this guy really cares. It would be an expression of caring in a way. In other words, if he had made a paradigm shift in that pyramid, if he had flipped it right on its head and put himself in a servant leader position, right? Servant leader position where there was support for us working there, it would have been great. We would no longer be in the flip, right? In the flip of the pyramid, those in his charge are no longer just peons, because nasty stuff does not flow uphill typically, right? He would have elevated us in terms of responsibility, in terms of empowerment, in terms of motivation, because empowerment also means confidence, right? In terms of granting responsibility, and then of course being somebody who cares. He would have been that, and that's a difficult thing to do for a lot of times. And I will hopefully get into that a bit later, but I remember when I was thinking about this sort of thing and putting it together and researching and taking anecdotes from my own life, like that story, I thought I was really brilliant having come up with this idea. Until I remembered back something that Lao Tzu says, which I believe some Chinese person corrected me recently. It's sort of like Lao Tzu or something. I don't know, but anyway, Lao Tzu wrote the book, the Tao Te Ching, about 2,600 years ago. That's a long time ago. And he was talking about this stuff then. And I'll just read off a part of it, and it makes sense in terms of the story of this guy, right? He says, to lead people, walk beside them. As for the best leader, the people do not notice their existence. The next best, the people honor and praise. The next, the people fear. And the next, the people hate. When the best leader's work is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. You see, with that flip, there's the elevation of value of those who are in the charge of the leader, and it's almost like they think that they're great, and therefore they are. It reminds me of a story actually of a brother of mine was telling me about the Vietnamese culture. He said it's rather matriarchal, but only sort of. It kind of is. He said what the women do is they stroke the ego of the men so that they get elevated in terms of their importance, and therefore they're great leaders within their community. So it's interesting how, a great leader can stroke the ego or the importance or and give authority and what have you to those in his or her charge, and as a result they rise in empowerment, and they're not put down. They're exalted by positive affirmation and credit for their work and so on, right? So, if it's true that 2,600 years ago it was acknowledged that people respond positively to incentive rather than threats and put downs in terms of that paradigm shift, then this story continues about ourselves, doesn't it, really? I mean, it's not so much about the other guys, the people we're delegating. Well, it might be, but we can't really change them. The only person we can change is ourselves. So it's really about ourselves, right? Because, and it's really about ourselves, and at the same time, it is important to acknowledge that we cannot do everything, right? We cannot be in all places at once. We don't have 100 hands. We haven't figured out how to clone ourselves. And yet at the same time, we can become very frustrated because we can delegate something and it doesn't get done, or it doesn't get done well. We don't have great productivity out of that delegation process. It's like, oh, darn it, I should have just done it myself, right? So I guess the way to look at it is to realize that if we flip it, at least to the degree that which we can, into that servant leader approach of being a support for those, a support in terms of, do they have the right resources? Do they have the right skill set? Are we having the conversations where we're digging down and finding the motivations and then calibrating our incentives to meet those motivations? That to me is the getting very close to the servant leader approach to this, and would create a much more effective delegation result, which means greater productivity in the end. Steve here, going great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.